Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about boxing for a moment, boxing history, because you only find out the truth years later, right? We now know that when he fought Evander Holyfield, champion Larry Holmes entered the ring wearing contact lenses. Right? Think about it. Contact lenses. During a fight against a heavyweight champion. Right? Think it through. One of the key moments in that fight, it's something Larry Holmes himself regrets, is in the third round. He got hit so hard by Holyfield that one of his contacts came out of his eye. He lost that lens. Holmes believes that if the contact didn't fall out during the fight, he would have won the fight. Right? Larry believes that today. I encourage you to Google Larry Holmes contact lenses Evander Holyfield. Right? Let's talk about another guy who was heavyweight champion, Joe Frazier. We now know that Joe Frazier had a lot of his big fights, the Thrilla in Manila, his fight against George Foreman, in fact, his fights against George Foreman. We now know that he fought those fights with only one good eye. He was blind in one eye. Right? Blind in one eye. According to folklore, the reason why his first fight against Ali ends up at Madison Square Garden is because Jack Kent Cooke, who was involved in bringing the guys together and who owned the Fabulous Forum in Southern California, feared that Joe Frazier's blindness would have been detected in California. Right? Boxers do crazy things. Don't believe the fighter who says, hey, if I had a bad eye, I wouldn't fight. I'm just naming big time fighters. Holmes, heavyweight champ, right? Former heavyweight champion. Joe Frazier, former heavyweight champion. Another great fighter, Aaron Pryor. Look him up. He had a fight when he couldn't see out of one of his eyes. I'm not talking about during the fight. I'm talking about before the fight. The guy knew he was one-eyed. He still went ahead with the fight. The state in which he fought had anti-discrimination laws against the disabled. Right? The issue was discussed. Aaron Pryor was allowed to go forward with the fight. Now, these are just elite fighters. You can imagine, in a world in which people have bills to pay, people have mouths to feed, right? You could imagine how many fighters have risked their vision to hop in the ring, right? Larry Holmes, by the way, according to some reports, may have had a detached retina when he entered the ring to fight Ray Mercer. Well, that brings me to Antonio Margarito. I'm just telling you, we don't know the full story about Margarito's eye. Now, do we? What we do know is that Margarito didn't fight for several years before this year. Right? We know that. We know Manny Pacquiao broke Margarito's orbital bone. Right? I'm just here to say, look, you might not find out the truth about Margarito's eye until years from now. Right? I mean, Joe Frazier himself went around late in life admitting to the fact that he was blind in one eye. Hence, you have the end of the Thrilla in Manila, where Joe Frazier has one eye puffed up. Folks, that was his good eye. And Eddie Futch, his cornerman, the same mentor to Freddie Roach, right? Eddie Futch, great trainer in an earlier generation. Keep in mind, Eddie wasn't just a trainer for Joe Frazier. He was later the trainer for Riddick Bowe. Still, in his prime, one of the best heavyweights I've ever seen. Well, understand, Eddie knew that if Joe Frazier's good eye closed, then Joe couldn't see at all in the ring. That's why Eddie throws in the towel. Had Joe had two good eyes, you know, the argument would be, okay, one eye's closed. Joe, you're a champ. This is the 15th round against the guy who you want to take out on this planet, right? Well, let me say, with Margarito, I suspect something's going on. I'm not a medical doctor, right? But wow, a guy has an eye injury. They stopped the Cotto fight. I thought it was a bad stoppage, but they stopped the Cotto fight because of the eye injury. Then Margarito, you know, doesn't fight often after that, right? He's retired after that. Now he's back. I'm a skeptic, right? I'm a skeptic. I'm telling you, I've seen guys fight where you looked at their eyes. Ishmael Vasquez, you looked at their eyes and you thought, you know what, something's not quite right here. And the guy's been allowed to fight, right? Well, since Frazier, Pryor, Larry Holmes were allowed to fight, who knows what's going on with Margarito being allowed to fight? The fact that he's allowed to fight doesn't tell me he has two good eyes, right? It just doesn't. Let me say this too, and I'm not betting against him in the fight. What I'm saying is fade his career. In other words, whether he wins or loses, this isn't the horse to bet on if he hops in the ring against real competition, right? If he hops in the ring at 154 against Canelo, take Canelo. I don't want to see, you know, the best of Margarito films from several years ago when he had two good eyes, right? If Margarito hops in the ring against Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, right? Billy Joe Saunders, take those guys. Take the guys in their prime. Because Margarito's eyes, that's questionable, right? Try beating Canelo with one eye, right? I don't know about Margarito's eyes. Let's just say I'm not going to bet on them. Also, Margarito's fight style is a young man's fight style, isn't it? Who has that fight style at the younger weights? Who's still on top of the food chain? The guys who survive long-term in the sport are guys like Guillermo Rigondeaux, or Rigondeaux, however you pronounce it, right? Guys who don't get hit, right? Guys who it's hard to remember when they had meaningful cuts, right? Those are the guys who survive, not the guys who've been in rough and tumble wars, right? They don't survive long-term. Ishmael Vasquez, he's out of the sport, right? So, win, lose, or draw, I personally am going to fade Margarito's career. Let's remember, too, it's been about 7 years since he was busted with loaded gloves in the Shane Mosley fight, right? Margarito's prime is well behind us, and trust me, I was a huge Margarito fan in his prime. Right now, it almost feels like I'm watching Roy Jones Jr., right? Not the same fighter. The guy was in his prime. Let me mention Roy Jones Jr. Let me mention another guy, the baby bull, Juan Diaz, right? You know, I know these guys can beat a club fighter on a good day, right? But take Roy Jones. You know, Enzo Maccarinelli destroyed him, didn't he? Look at that fight. Destroyed him. But Maccarinelli himself was so close to the end that I believe he retired after his next fight. Right? Think about it. You know, Baby Bull came back. He's been winning. But again, he's a volume fighter. He's not a defensive fighter. He's a front foot guy who's doling out volume while taking a lot of punishment. That's a young man style. That might work when you first come back from a layoff and you're fighting, guys who are fringe contenders. I would fade Baby Bull when he steps up to fight real contenders. Right? Let's switch gears. Hey, we all believe that we know about the finances in boxing, right? Everyone is a closet mogul, right? Everyone's like, hey, if I were advising him, I would tell him this. If I were advising him about this, I'd tell him that, right? I'm no different. I'm not pointing fingers except at myself here. Well, let me say this. Billy Joe Saunders, middleweight champion. Let's remember how he became the middleweight champion. Right? Beat Andy Lee. Right? Tough opponent. A guy who got a draw with Kid Chocolate. Right? Well, Billy Joe Saunders was offered a spot on the Canelo card. Right? This card's interesting because... Luis Ortiz, he was on the card, he's off the card. Now, Billy Joe Saunders, he's on the card, he's off the card. The card, who's on the card, is as intriguing as who wins the Canelo fight, quite frankly. Well, Billy Joe Saunders was offered Gabe Rosado, right? Rosado, tough, tested. They call him the king for a reason. Front foot heavy. Right? You don't have to wonder where Gabe Rosado is. You don't have to look over here and look. No. You just look straight ahead. Here he is. Right? Front foot heavy guy. Throws punches with mean intentions. Here's the catch, though. Gabe Rosado doesn't have a belt. Does he? Billy Joe Saunders has the belt. If you're the champion, why would you risk your title on Gabe Rosado when, if you just wait a little while, there's going to be a winner of the Golovkin-Kell Brook fight, and you're going to be one of the most appealing opponents for that winner, right? Understand, let's say Kell Brook has decided he's going to wage war on the middleweight division. Right? If Kell Brook wins a share, I don't see it happening, but if it happens, if Kell Brook wins a share of the middleweight title by beating Golovkin, understand, it would be a unification match at middleweight between two Englishmen, Kell Brook and Billy Joe Saunders. That fight would sell out an arena in a matter of minutes, in my opinion. Right? Maybe not Wembley, but, a decent-sized arena. It would put both of their names on the front page of several British newspapers. It would be a must-watch fight, right? Because understand, the winner of Golovkin-Brook is going to be viewed as one of boxing's best pound for pound. So here you'd have a legitimate unification match. I'm guessing Billy Joe Saunders and Kell Brook would be the headlining fight. Not the undercard to some Canelo fight, but the headlining fight for the middleweight unification match. And I'm guessing Billy Joe Saunders would make significantly more money than he would risking his title against Gabe Rosado. And let me add, if Golovkin beats Kell Brook, right, you can imagine, that's going to raise Golovkin's profile in the United Kingdom. Kell Brook is unbeaten. Understand, that fight is getting so much attention right now that we even know what the guys weighed 30 days before the weigh-in. Right? Many people are interested in that. There are photos of Kell Brook all bulked up all over the net. Right? Well, understand, if Golovkin beats Kell Brook, right? His next logical opponent, in my eyes, would be the Englishman who has a share of the middleweight title, right? Billy Joe Saunders, also unbeaten. Golovkin could make it look like it's a invasion of England, right? Hey, I've taken out one of your unbeaten fighters. You know, I'm here to unify the title. If Billy Joe Saunders is ready, let me take out another of your unbeaten fighters. Right? This time, let me fight a real middleweight. Right? So if I'm Saunders, you know, really, I would have to think about the money. Right? It's prize fighting. Let's never forget that. There's no reason for this guy to run around and take on every challenge. I know it's unfair. I know Gabe Rosado is doing what he can to put himself in a title fight, and let's all respect that. Right? Let's all respect that. But just because a champ is offered a high-profile fight doesn't mean that he should take it. Right? If I were Saunders, I would hang around a bit and see what happens. Let me say this too. Golovkin was about to fight Chris Eubank. Right? This sets up a scene that's straight out of a Rocky movie. Right? You can imagine Saunders showing up and saying, hey, well, wait a moment. Golovkin, why are you fighting a guy who doesn't have a belt? A guy who I've already beaten. You're going to come to my country. You're going to advertise this as a middleweight fight. You're going to try to tell the public that you're fighting the best when I'm here wearing a belt and I've already beaten your opponent. Right? You're trying to get my sloppy seconds, aren't you? Right? All I'm saying is the smack talk here could be a plus level. Right? So if I'm Saunders, I think Saunders is making the right decision here. Right? If I'm Saunders, given what's happening, given the landscape of what's happening in his division, given the magnitude of the Golovkin fight that's going to be happening in his country, if I'm Saunders, I'm not going to risk my title against some hungry opponent when that fight doesn't get me anything other than a smaller payday than I would get waiting for the winner of Golovkin-Brook. Let me go one step further. Let's say the winner of Golovkin and Brook decides, and this happens in boxing, right? Hey, I'm going to take some time off, right? Or let's say this happens too. The winner's hurt. We saw this in the Deontay Wilder fight. Wilder wins. Wilder's a warrior. But hey, you break your hand, you tear your bicep, you're having surgery, you're out of the running for months. So let's say the winner of Brook Golovkin is out of the running. That's still a tantalizing fight, isn't it? Billy Joe Saunders against the loser. Or Billy Joe Saunders saying, okay, Golovkin didn't want to fight you, Chris Eubank. Let's do it again. You think I got lucky the first time? Let's set the record straight in a rematch. Right? Let's just say Billy Saunders has a lot of options because a lot's happening at middleweight, including the rematch between Danny Jacobs and Sergio Mora. Let's remember Danny Jacobs. He's one of the more intriguing middleweight champions. Remember, right? Andy Lee got a draw with Kid Chocolate. We never saw Kid Chocolate completely dismantled until we saw him against Danny Jacobs. Let me close by pointing out how little we know. How little we know about a young lion who is a heavyweight champion. Now, we all know that there's several young lions who are heavyweight champions, more than one who we know little about. But now we're finding out that Anthony Joshua, who we saw on the canvas against Dylan White, in a video that's on YouTube right now. Just Google Dillian Whyte, Joshua, amateurs. You're going to see Anthony Joshua get dropped by Dillian Whyte when he was a young pup, just learning the sport. Well, now we're hearing from David Price that, hey, in 2011, I dropped him. Face first. How did he leave the ring? With the help of trainers. Think about it, right? Think about it. It's 1 year before Joshua wins the Olympics. Now, I agree with people who say, hey, that's what, 5 years ago? Right? 5 years, that's a long time in boxing. That's a long time in boxing. I agree with those people. The point, though, is what do you know? What do I know about Anthony Joshua's chin? Right? Tell us the fight where he's hit hard, walks through some brutal shots. Right? You and I know that wasn't the Kevin Johnson fight. Right? You know, I would say that that's not the Brazil fight. Let's just say, well, we know it wasn't the Charles Johnson fight. Right? So all I'm saying is this. He's unbeaten. He's won fights decisively. Right? I personally don't know about whether he has a back foot game. Right? And I've seen several Joshua fights. Right? Now, because of what David Price is saying, and I know David Price has an agenda, right? He's another hungry opponent who wants the match. Right? Okay, sure, he has an agenda. But at the same time, is it true or not? Right? Is there any kind of China on Anthony Joshua's chin? It matters at heavyweight when people like David Haye are in the mix. Guys with punches who have ring coverage. Right? It matters. Right? Let's say Vladimir Klitschko, who has a punch, gets by Tyson Fury. A guy's ability to take a punch would matter. Some guys can make adjustments. Right? Vladimir Klitschko has had his car crashes. Right? He's blown out by Corey Sanders. Right? That fight isn't a fatigue fight. It's not a I'm tired, I'm hitting the canvas fight. It's not the Lehman Brewster Vladimir Klitschko fight. Right? That fight he's hit, he's blown out. Right? Vladimir Klitschko has developed a jab and a defensive shell that prevents him from getting hit too hard on the chin. Right? It's reached a point where we've now forgotten Sam Peter put him on the canvas twice. Right? The point is, if he fights Anthony Joshua and if he lands, is Joshua the kind of guy who can just walk through big shots? Or is Joshua the kind of Goliath who might surprise us by ending up on the canvas? Like Mike Tyson did against Buster Douglas. Right? Also, I'm curious about how this whole thing plays out. Right? David Price wants a fight against Anthony Joshua. Let's face it, half of England wants a fight against Anthony Joshua, right? David Haye wants a fight against Anthony Joshua. Right? Let's just say Joshua has a lot of options. Just remember, though, his mandatory is Joseph Parker. A lot's going on at heavyweight. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. If you get one takeaway from this video, it should be that we should all take eye injuries seriously. Right? Fighters during their careers really don't tell you what's really going on. You only find out about it later. Right? Some great fighters have had detached retinas. Harry Greb, when he died, they did an autopsy on his body. I'm talking about an all-time great fighter from 100 years ago. They did an autopsy on his body. And they found out that he had been blind in several fights in one eye. Right? So Antonio Margarito, to me, has the spirit of a warrior. I'm just telling you that that spirit sometimes has guys right? You know, not quite telling you they are blind in one eye until after their career, like Joe Frazier told us, right? Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you do research Larry Holmes' contact lenses. Evander Holyfield. Thanks for stopping by.